And now we keep returning back to some of the extreme thing. That's not a caricature. That is a fair assessment of where we are with these kind of things.
Kamala Harris was not a progressive left candidate. She was not a Tim Wall. Like I guess.
What's up, family? Today we got a situation that just makes you shake your head, man. You got Jon Stewart, yeah, that guy, the guy who used to be the funny man on the Daily Show, the guy who calls himself a voice of reason, trying to sit here and gaslight the entire country about what Kamala Harris actually stood for. I mean, think about that for a second. Here's a man who spent years making fun of politicians for lying, and now he's out here doing the exact same thing, trying to convince everybody that Kamala Harris was never a progressive left candidate, that Tim Watts was never woke, that none of what we saw with our own two eyes actually happened, right? And then you got Senator John Fetterman, a Democrat, a sitting United States senator who ran as a progressive and won, coming out and saying the quiet part out loud. Fetterman is telling the truth about his own party, about the Democratic Socialists of America colonizing the Democratic Party, about how these extreme views are making them unelectable in real states, and Jon Stewart can't handle it. He's over there getting bent out of shape, calling it camaraderies and straw men, and But here's the thing, family: when a sitting Democrat senator is telling you there's a problem inside his own party, maybe you should listen instead of trying to shut him down or shout him down. So we're going to break this whole thing down, look at the receipts, look at what Harris actually said, or I should say, I'll basically bring up points of what Harris actually said in the past, and you guys can go check it out yourself. But what Watts actually signed and what the DSA is actually doing. And then I'm going to give you my thoughts on why this matters for every single one of us. Hit the like button, share this video, subscribe to the channel, and let's get into it, right? So here's what had happened, or here's what happened. Jon Stewart goes on his show, starts talking about how Kamala Harris was not a progressive left candidate, that she wasn't like Tim Watts, that all the criticism of her being too far left is just Republican camaraderies and strawmen. And I mean, you hear that and you got to wonder if this man has access to the internet. Does he not remember 2019? Does he not remember 2020? Does he not remember what Kamala Harris herself said on camera with her own mouth? Because here's what she actually said. In 2017, Kamala Harris literally said, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is close, right? She said, everyone needs to be woke and just stay more woke than less woke. That's not a Fox News edit. That's not a right-wing meme. That came out of her own mouth on video that still exists. And you guys go check it out. And just weeks ago, she was floating the idea of expanding the Supreme Court to 13 justices and revisiting the Electoral College so Democrats essentially become too big to lose. She said there were no bad ideas when it comes to packing the court. No bad ideas. Think about that. The Supreme Court of the United States, this institution that has stood for over 200 years, and she's out here saying there's no bad idea when it comes to changing how it works so her side can win. That's not moderate. That's not centrist. That's not some Republican camaraderie. That's her own words. But Jon Stewart wants you to believe that never happened, that she was always this reasonable moderate who just got painted as extreme by mean Republicans. And this is where Fetterman comes in and drops the hammer.
What I would say is, what I'm saying is right now, our party is starting to elect people that are going to struggle to win in the kinds of places that are going to define who's going to win in 28. That's a fact. And now a lot of these ideas and a lot of these extreme views are coming from the kind of people that have never won a real competitive election in state that holds both sides, and hold people accountable to explain a way forward when we live in a very divided country right now. I think the responsibility is to police your own ranks, and it's like there's plenty of people, as I've been criticizing some of the Republican views, but overall describing what garbage is garbage.
Plattner.
Yeah. I mean, so that's not a caricature.
This feels like it's playing into the hands of Republican caricatures.
Why can't people on the Democratic side finally figure out why Trump was so competitive and winning 2 out of the 3 last cycles. Why is he still here? Why are we still doing it? Because we keep losing.
Fetterman went on and basically said, look, our party is starting to elect people who are going to struggle on winning this kind of places that define who wins in 2028. All right, that's basically what he said. The party is starting to elect people who are going to struggle to win in kind of places that define the 2028 election. It's a fact. A lot of these extreme views are coming from people who have never won a real competitive election. He said the responsibility is to police your own ranks. And Stewart immediately jumped in going, that feels like it's playing into the hands of Republicans' camaraderies or characters, caricatures. You get what I'm saying? You heard it, right? That was in the clip. But Fetterman wasn't having it, as you've seen. And this is what I respect about Fetterman on this issue. He's not playing the game. He's a Democrat who won in Pennsylvania, one of the most important swing states in the country. And he's telling his party straight up that they have a problem. And what does Stewart do? He tries to say Fetterman is just describing garbage. But Fetterman was like, what garbage? Because here's the thing. When you actually look at the candidates the DSA is putting up, I mean, the positions they're running on, it's not caricatures, right? It's reality. And Scott Jennings, who was on the panel, applied the duck test. If it walks like a socialist and talks like a socialist and hangs out with Bernie Sanders and Ilhan Omar and backs abolishing ICE and supports gender surgeries for minors and pushes cuts to military aid and is openly pro-Palestine while American communities are struggling, it's probably not a moderate family. It's probably a socialist. And that's not name calling. That's just looking at the record, as I'm showing you on the screen. But don't take my word for it. I want you guys to see Scott Jennings saying it.
There was another election on Tuesday. It was in Minnesota, and the socialist over in Minnesota, Peggy Flanagan.
She's not a socialist.
Okay, the radical lunatic Peggy Flanagan decided she won over the moderate Craig. I mean, that did happen in a state with a lot of rural voters, and so the socialists.
Hold on one second. This speaks to the conflation that's.
Now let's talk about the actual record, because this is where the gaslighting really starts to get insulting. Kamala Harris didn't just dabble in progressive positions. She went all in. She supported Medicare for all, which means ending private health insurance for every single American. She supported a full fracking ban, which would have destroyed energy jobs in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Texas. States Democrats need to win, by the way. And she supported taxpayer-funded gender transition surgeries for prisoners and detainees, right? So I always like to put up the data, because she said there's no bad ideas when it comes to packing the courts and things that I mentioned. But also, she supported ending private health insurance completely. And in 2026, she's still floating, packing the Supreme Court and abolishing the Electoral College. These aren't side issues. These are major structural changes to how this country works. And Jon Stewart wants to sit there with a straight face and says, that's not a progressive left candidate. I mean, what would she have had to do to qualify? Stand on a stage and read the Communist Manifesto? Because at this point, I'm not sure what else she could have done, right? I mean, you got Tim Walz. Remember Tim Walz? The guy Democrats picked as the VP candidate as vice president, specifically because he was supposed to appeal to rural moderates. The guy who signed an executive order making Minnesota a refugee for gender-affirming care for minors. The guy who signed one of the most liberal state agendas in the country. But Jon Stewart wants you to believe that Watts was never woke and that none of that stuff was real. It's like they think we don't have memories. They think we don't see the videos. They think we don't know how to use Google, but we do. And that's why this gaslighting falls apart the second you actually check. Because here's what this looks like in real life. You got a party that spent years celebrating abolish ICE energy, calling border enforcement cruel, talking about how we need to fund the police, talking about how we need to stay woke, talking about how we need to dismantle the system. And now that those positions cost them elections, they want to pretend none of it happened. They want to gaslight you into believing that Kamala Harris was actually a centrist the whole time, that Tim Walz was actually a moderate, that the DSA is just a fringe group that nobody takes seriously. But Fetterman is saying no. He's a sitting senator from a swing state saying no. And Scott Jennings is saying if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, call it a duck. I want you guys also to see another segment from Jon Stewart.
And now, and we're in that same bullshit place now where all these new ideas, suddenly the Democrats are, these democratic socialists, they're crazy. And you're like, well, but that, generally their crazy ideas aren't where the energy is. The energy isn't around like, we shouldn't have prisons or borders. The energy is around a belief that they're economic populism. And when you call it socialism, I think it's a misnomer. Like in the same way that if you call Social Security socialism, that's kind of a misnomer. It's about strengthening a safety net for a country that has suffered too long overvaluing capital and money and undervaluing labor and work. That's all. That's it. And it's, so I don't get the whole hullabaloo.
Here's where it gets even deeper. You got people like Jessica Tarlov on these panels saying AOC is the future of the party and that she's a moderate. AOC, the same AOC who's back abolishing ICE, the Green New Deal that will have cost trillions to fund the police energy, open DSA alignment. The same AOC who has favorable views of people like Hassan Piker, who openly says he hates America and has called for political violence. And they want to call her a moderate. At what point do we just admit that words have lost all meaning in politics? Because if AOC is a moderate, then some people will say that they're Marxists because it's absurd, right? Some people, I have come across people saying literally, and this is their words, not mine, because if AOC is a moderate, then I'm a Marxist. Literally, I have come across someone saying that. It's absurd, but they keep saying it because they know their base doesn't want to hear that they're being pulled further and further left, and they want to believe that they're the reasonable ones and that everyone else is just extreme, but the numbers don't lie. About 1/3 of Democrats now identify as democratic socialists. That's not a small fringe, okay? It's not a small fringe. And when you look at that, that's a huge chunk of the party. And when those are the people you're nominating in primaries, you end up with candidates who can't win general elections in real states. And this is exactly why what Fetterman warned about. He said the DSA is colonizing the party, and then primaries happen, and what do we see? Peggy Flanagan wins in Minnesota over a moderate candidate, walks like a socialist, talks like a socialist, backs a complete overhaul of ICE beyond reform, supports gender-affirming care for youth, is openly pro-Palestine while pushing cuts to military aid. That's the duck test right there. And Jon Stewart wants to sit there and say, she's not a socialist, but what would you call it? What would you call someone who runs on those positions in any other context? You call them a socialist, as most would say. It's only in the funhouse mirror of mainstream media that suddenly socialist doesn't mean socialist anymore. Here's what's really going on under the surface. The media spent years treating abolish ICE as exciting energy. They spent years calling border enforcement cruel. They spent years telling you that defunding the police was a reasonable policy position. They spend years platforming people who said America is fundamentally evil and needs to be torn down. And now that American people have rejected those ideas at the ballot box, they want to pretend they never said any of it. They want to rewrite history. They want to gaslight you into believing that Kamala Harris was never progressive, that Tim Walz was never woke, that the DSA is just a tiny fringe group. But the receipts are out there. The video is out there. The legislation is out there. And Fetterman, of all people, a Democrat senator, is the one actually telling the truth about it. So what are we supposed to take from all of this? Because this is where the lesson comes in. And this is why I do what I do. Because it's not just about politics. It's about being able to trust what you hear from people who are supposed to be informing you. And if Jon Stewart, who built his whole career on calling out lies, is now out here lying about what a political candidate actually stood for, then what can you trust? If the same media outlets that spent years celebrating wokeness and abolishing ICE and the funding of the police are now acting like none of that happened, then what else are they lying about? The answer is a lot. And the only defense you have is your own ability to think, to check, to verify, to not just accept what you're told because it comes from a familiar face or a trusted brand. Because at the end of the day, the truth doesn't care about your political party. The truth doesn't care about your feelings. The truth just is the truth. And when people try to hide the truth behind a curtain of gaslighting and word games, eventually the curtain gets pulled back. And here's the bigger conversation that needs to happen. Because this isn't just about Kamala Harris or Jon Stewart or the DSA. This is about whether we can have an honest conversation in this country about what politicians actually believe and what they'll actually do if they get power. Because if we can't even agree on what a candidate's record was 2 years ago, how are we supposed to have any kind of reasonable debate about the future? The answer is we can't. And that's by design, because if they could keep arguing or keep you arguing about whether Kamala Harris was actually progressive or not, you're not talking about the border crisis that happened on her watch. You're not talking about the tens of millions of 10 million plus encounters. You're not talking about the fentanyl that flowed into communities. Yes, the fentanyl. You're not talking about the wage pressure on American workers. You're not talking about the inflation that ate your paycheck. You're arguing about cinematics. You're arguing about what the word progressive means. And while you're doing that, they're moving the country in the direction they want to move it anyway. And this is why Fetterman speaking up matters, because he's not playing the game. He's a Democrat who's willing to say, hey, my party has a problem with extreme candidates who can't win. And for that, Jon Stewart calls him, basically a liar in a way by gaslighting and making like what he's saying is not truthful. He's trying to remix it to what he wants it to seem right, Jon Stewart. But let me ask you this. Who seems more reasonable here? The guy who says we need to police our own ranks and stop nominating people who can't win in competitive districts? Or the guy who says that that's just Republican characters, right? That's just Republican camaraderies, while refusing to engage with the actual positions? I think you know the answer. And that's why Fetterman, despite being a Democrat I disagree with on plenty, deserves some respect for this one, because he's telling the truth about what he sees inside his own party. And that takes guts in today's political environment where everyone is expected to just fall in line and never criticize their own side. Now, let's talk about where we go from here, because this isn't just a gotcha moment. This is a pattern. The media rewrites history every single election cycle. They did it with Obama. Suddenly, he was the post-partisan uniter, even though his record shows something different. They did it with Biden. Suddenly, he was this moderate deal maker, even though his career was full of progressive positions. And now they're trying to do it with Harris. Suddenly, she was never progressive. She was always reasonable. All the criticism was just mean Republican attacks. But the receipts don't disappear because you want them to. The video doesn't unexist, and the more they try to gaslight people, the more people start to realize they can't trust anything coming out of these media outlets. And that's where the real danger is for them, because once you lose trust, it's impossible to get it back. And a lot of Americans have already checked out. They don't trust CNN. They don't trust MSNBC. They don't trust the networks. They don't trust the papers. And when you see stuff like Jon Stewart trying to rewrite history, it just confirms what they already suspected, that the people who are supposed to be informing them are actually trying to manipulate them. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. So here's what I want you to take away from all this, family. Don't let anyone tell you what you saw with your own eyes didn't happen. I'm not here to tell you what to think or how to think. I'm just having a productive conversation with you guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments so far, and give this video a big thumbs up. But don't let anyone gaslight you into thinking that up is down and left is right. If Kamala Harris ran on the most progressive platform in the history of presidential candidates, she ran on the most progressive platform in the history of presidential candidates. If Tim Watts signed the most progressive state agenda in the country, he signed the most progressive state agenda in the country. If the DSA is winning primaries and pushing the Democratic Party further left, they're winning primaries and pushing the Democratic Party further left. None of that is however he wants to say it, a caricature. None of that is a straw man. It's just the truth. No amount of Jon Stewart hand waving is going to change it. Now, let me ask you something, family. I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Jon Stewart knows he's gaslighting people, or do you think he actually believes what he's saying? Is Fetterman right that the DSA is colonizing the party and making it unelectable, or is Stewart right that it's all just Republican camaraderies? Let me know what you think. Drop a comment. Let's have a real conversation about it. And I want to leave you with something to think about. And this is important because beyond all the politics and all the arguing and the gaslighting, there's a deeper truth that applies to all of us, no matter where you stand politically. And that's why I try to focus on at the end of every video, because at the end of the day, my goal isn't just to get you angry or get you riled up. No, not at all. It's to teach you something that you can actually use, something that helps you navigate this crazy world a little better. The Bible says in Luke chapter 12, verses 2 and 3, there is nothing concealed that will be not disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What you have said in the dark will be heard in the daylight, and what you have whispered in the ear in the inner rooms will be proclaimed from the roofs. And I love that verse because it speaks directly to what we're talking about today. All this gaslight and all this rewriting of history, all this trying to hide what Kamala Harris actually said and did behind a curtain of media spin is not going to work forever. The truth always comes out. What's whispered in dark gets shouted from the rooftops, and that's what we're seeing right now. Fetterman is the one shouting from the rooftops, what everyone in the Democratic Party has been whispering in the dark for years. And it's only a matter of time before everything else that's hidden gets exposed too. And for those who aren't spiritual, here's the life wisdom. Truth has a way of surfacing. You can hide it for a while, you can spin it, you can gaslight, you can rewrite narrative, but eventually reality catches up. And when it does, all the spin in the world won't save you. So here's what I want you to take away. Build your life on what's real. Build your understanding on what you can verify. And don't just accept what people tell you because they have a familiar face or trusted brand. Check the receipts, follow the evidence, and when something doesn't add up, trust your gut. Because the people who are trying to gaslight you are counting on you being too lazy to check. Don't be that person. Be the one who does the work. Be the one who knows what's real. And with that, family, I'm going to get up out of here. Let me know what you think in the comments. Hit the like button. If this made sense to you, share it with somebody who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on your post notifications so you never miss a breakdown. Until next time, spread that peace, love, and positivity. Let the love supersede the hate. On that note, family, peace.